Hi, I'm Yona from Field Teen Center, and today I'm here with Jessica from Quirk Books, who is an editor. So we're going to be talking about what it's like to be an editor, how make good books, and anything else that interests us today. So hi, Jessica.
Hey.
Thanks so much for joining us. So, a lot of our teens come into the library and leave with big stacks of books. So, I bet some of them would be curious, what did you like to read as a teen?
Oh my gosh. Um, my mind immediately jumped to the Animorphs, which is not what I read as a teen. But when I think about large stacks of books, I mean, like, I'm like Animorphs, Percy Jackson, Artemis Fowl, the whole nine yards. But as a teen, I was really into sci-fi and fantasy. I read a lot of like Terry Pratchett and yeah, and Diana Wynne Jones, Howl's Moving Castle, that kind of thing. I also like would go to the young adult section and just go to like straight to the new book section and just like scour it for like whatever was like hot and new and just like take everything off the shelves. So
Yeah, I
I
bet that
also had
practice
stacks of books.
I bet that practice of looking at the new books and seeing what's hot is really useful as an editor too.
Oh, absolutely. I'm always still doing that. I'll like go to Barnes and Nobles or I'll go to like an indie bookstore in the area or the library and just like peruse all the new bookshelves, especially the TikTok table. I'm hitting that up for sure.
Yeah. So, can you walk us through a day in the life of an editor? What do you do besides, going to Barnes and Noble and looking at the TikTok table?
I mean, that is part of my day.
Yeah.
Um, Yeah, well, I wake up and I'm always a little bit late because I am not a morning person. And then I just like crack open my email, which isn't super exciting, but a lot of being an editor is emails, 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 because
Mhm.
publishing is very email centric, which I was kind of surprised about when I entered the publishing industry. But I think they're moving away from that. They're like, they're moving with the times.
Mhm.
So I
So
check a
do you
lot of
work from
emails.
home?
Hmm?
Do you work from home?
Oh, yes.
Cool.
I go into the office once a week. So it's kind of a hybrid situation, which I'm very
Mhm.
thankful for because, pandemic.
Yeah.
And well, I check my emails and then I kind of like figure out what my schedule is for the day. And that might range anything from like emailing agents to ask for blurbs for books or, marking up a manuscript or checking the proofs of a manuscript or like emailing my authors about like this or that I need from them. And I keep track of like what are all my meetings for the day.
Mhm.
Do I have a scheduling meeting or like a planning meeting or an editorial meeting? And just like depending on what's on my to-do list, I just like tackle it.
Nice. So it sounds like you have to be really organized because you set your own schedule a lot of the time.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a running list to-do list and I just like keep track of it and keep going down. I know other people have like a much more organized to-do list, but I have this like sort of chaotic thing where I just like type out a list of things I have to do and I just like delete them and move them around. So
Mm.
don't be like me.
I mean, it seems like it's going okay. Maybe do be
Yeah.
like you. So, what's your favorite part of your job?
Oh my gosh. There's so much. I actually
Oh, that's good.
one thing I really enjoy is just learning about new books and like keeping up with like what's hot and like what people are reading and like what people like. Cause it's, I in my free time, I tend to read a lot of like sci-fi fantasy and like romance and YA, and I'll like check out middle grade. But it's really interesting to find out what people who have very different tastes than me are interested in. Because there's a reason. Like people will sometimes be like, "Oh, well, this book like sucks. Why do so many people like it?" And it's like that's there's usually a reason people like books, and it's really fun to kind of like play the detective and why find out like why this book that you personally might not like is really appealing to someone else.
That's fun. Has there been a book that or maybe a genre of books that you were just like, oh, I just can't, and it surprised you that people were really into it?
This didn't surprise me, but I've never been a fan of like horror novels and thrillers because
Oh.
I'm a little chicken. But they have quite an audience, and
Mhm.
it's like, why do they have an audience? And it's like, well, there's actually so many appealing and fascinating things about like horror and thriller novels where it's like, there's the catharsis, there's like the thrill because thriller, and
Yeah.
it's like sometimes it's very like freeing for people, or it's like exciting and like action packed, and also like really gets into some meaty themes about like society. And so
Mm.
it's really interesting to like learn like what is it that people who aren't cowards like me like about like horror or thrillers or
So
that kind of thing.
it sounds like you really need to be, so you have to be organized, but you also have to be empathetic because you need to know what makes other people tick and be able to give them things they want, even if you don't want them.
Yeah, for sure. Because ultimately, I think storytelling is all about like communication and like understanding
Mm.
other people, and also like communicating who you are to other people. So I think it's really important to understand why you like a book and also why someone else might like a book, and like what is the appeal there, and like what are you trying to get out of a book, and what is an author trying to say, and like, the whole context around a book.
Right. Yeah, it's a fun game. We do that a lot as librarians too. We like to talk about like, did I personally like this book? Yes, no. Great. But like, would the teens that we actually serve like this book? Because those might be different answers.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
So, what do you think is the hardest part of your job? And that could either be like the most challenging, like you are like striving to do it, or your least favorite, either way.
I think the most challenging would be writing copy for books. So Hanging with Vampires, which is a nonfiction middle grade book.
And it's
Like writing the
nonfiction?
Hmm?
It's nonfiction?
Yeah, it's all about vampires, but the like real life stuff about it, like, what's the history of why people believed in vampires, and like
Okay,
what are
okay.
vampire stories around the world.
Cool.
Anyway,
Got it.
it's from the series A Totally Factual Field Guide to the Supernatural. Shout out. Yeah, and so there's like the copy on the back,
Mm.
um, and like the text, there's like a little headline, and there's like what's so appealing about it, kind of like the book description on the back.
Hmm.
I always find it really challenging to write those because it's just so hard to like distill a book into like a short amount of words.
Right.
And
That's
then
why it's a whole
also,
book.
yeah, and then while also like grabbing attention of the reader and the bookseller and librarian and the parent, and like trying to figure out like what every audience is looking for in a book, and distilling that all that text into like something that like everybody can be like, ooh, I want to pick up that book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. I didn't realize that was one of your responsibilities.
Yeah, it's challenging, but I'm learning a lot from it.
Right. So in some ways you're kind of part of the writing process. Like it's not just here's a book and somebody has finished it. You're like shaping it a little bit and changing how it's presented to the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that writers and editors sound like two separate, totally separate entities, but it's like editors will do like, they'll like write copy, and they'll like suggest things to writers, and then writers, they write the book, but they also do some editing on their own. Like we
Mhm.
might suggest like, hey, can you revise this? But the writer also has to like come up with things with like help from us as editors, because we're a team. The writer also has to like think about how they want to like edit their work and revise it. And so, like everyone kind of wears a lot of different hats.
Nice. Yeah, so it sounds like there's a lot of like flexibility in it too.
Yeah, a lot of flexibility and a lot of collaboration.
Yeah. Okay. So I've been pulling out some like keywords and key skills that I'm hearing you talk about. But in your opinion, what does it take to be a good editor?
Oh my gosh. So, funny story. Before I was an editor, I was a game writer and a community
Okay.
manager, and I was part of a writing team. And in that writing team, we would like write, we like kind of worked on these things that were sort of visual novel adjacent, like, those choice-based text stories.
Mm-hmm.
And on the writing team, we didn't have designated editors. Every writer was an editor as well. So we would like, I would write something and my teammate would edit it, and then
Mm-hmm.
they would write something and I would edit it, and we would all like take turns. And something that I learned that was very important, especially if you're constantly in both the writing and the editing treadmill, is that it's very important to give constructive feedback, and that it's a real skill to give constructive feedback that is like meaningful and collaborative and not like harsh or
Mm-hmm.
prescriptive. because I think the instinct when you're editing is that you think that like the editor is going to tell you like fix this, it's bad, and it's like that.
Sure.
If an editor has that kind of attitude, they're a bad editor. Um,
Mhm.
and it's really important to be like collaborative and kind of like share that like you're on the same team and you're working towards this goal together with your like amazing author, and kind of giving feedback that kind of comes from a place of understanding what the author is thinking about, and
Mhm.
also kind of give direction. Like you can't just be like, this sentence sucks, fix it. You know,
Right. Right.
like I this is a terrible story, but like I used to get notes that were like, punch this up, punch this up, punch this up, with like no direction whatsoever. And I would just
Right.
like rack my brains being like, how can I make a sentence be better? I'm clearly just not good enough. And it
Mhm.
sucked. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really important to kind of give direction
Mhm.
and be collaborative and like thoughtful and like empathetic when you are editing. And like remember that you're part of a team, and like there isn't it's not like this power dynamic where you're like you're the editor dictating something to your writer, because that's just not how it is, and that's kind of messed up. So yeah, I
Right.
mean, and that applies to a lot of parts of life where like if you're trying to like suggest something to someone, like coming from a place of understanding is really important.
Yeah. I think that for a lot of people and even a lot of teens, writing is a solitary thing. They do it by themselves and for themselves. Do you have advice for people who are in that situation who are like, oh, snap, I'm listening to Jessica's words of wisdom and I'm realizing I need to become more collaborative and practice those skills?
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that because as a teen, when I wrote and I like did NaNoWriMo,
Yeah.
and maybe gave myself carpal tunnel. So stretch your wrists, do your arm exercises, drink water if you're doing NaNoWriMo.
Drink
I did
water.
NaNoWriMo like every year since I was like in middle school. And it was a very
Wow.
solitary practice. And I didn't get friends to like read my writing. I just was like and like having fun. And that's
Hmm.
great too. Like writing on your own just for yourself is fantastic. But if you also want to be like collaborative, you can always like seek out other writers, other friends, and like, be like, hey, do you want to be in a writing group together? And share that with your friends. And like writing can feel quite vulnerable and like
Hmm.
awful, like, oh, I can never let anyone see my writing, it can't see the light of day. But you know what,
Right.
that's not true. Like your friends who support you will be super excited to read your work, and if it sucks, your friends will just be like, haha, this sucks, but I had fun reading it. It's no big deal. Every like writing is a work in progress. So like don't be afraid to make yourself vulnerable and like share your writing with others. And that means usually if whatever you like, if you share writing with someone else, they're more willing to share their writing with you. Like if you're vulnerable to
Mm.
someone else, they're more vulnerable to you, and like you can kind of like connect on that front.
Right. Yeah. And then this is something else I'm noticing. I don't know that you've listed this as like, as an editor, you need to be, but just because of the way we met, I've noticed that you're really good at putting yourself out there. Like we met because you came to the library and started asking us questions, and you didn't have to do that, right? But now we have this opportunity to collaborate and make this video that never existed before.
Exactly.
So I thought that was really cool. And yeah, it makes sense. If you're brave enough to put yourself out there, you'll get some potential benefits.
Yes.
All right.
Emphasis
So
on
we've talked.
brave, because I was quite nervous.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I want to talk to these amazing librarians and they seem so cool and I want to ask them questions and they definitely know what's up. But I was like, gotta talk to them.
No, we were excited. So we've talked a little bit about things that are helpful for writers. Is there anything else you want to add to the world of what makes a good writer, especially because you're working directly with writers all the time?
Ooh, yes. So on the flip side of editors needing to be constructive and helpful and empathetic in how they edit, I
Mhm.
think it's super important for writers, and I've experienced this as like a writer, is to be open to feedback and open to learning, because writing is like the practice of writing is a work in progress, and like
Mhm.
as human beings we're works in progress. So like there's always room to learn how to write better, and always room to learn um like just how to get your what you want to say across.
Mhm.
And I think a big part of that is being willing to like read as widely as possible. So on the one hand, I love to stick to my comfort reads, but every so often I'll be like, Jessica, you got to go get out there and read something different because, there's something to learn about. Like if you pick up a book that you normally wouldn't read, you can get a lot out of it.
Mm,
So reading widely and reading a lot can really help you learn like what makes a story work, what makes a story not work, and like what do you enjoy? And you might surprise yourself. You might be like, I hate this kind of book. And then you pick it up and you're like, wow, it was amazing.
yeah.
So I think reading widely and being open to like new stories and also new ways of thinking is really important.
Nice. That makes sense to me. So we've talked about some more general skills and attitudes. And I mean, I feel personally uplifted by them. So I hope some of our people who are watching feel the same. Let's get into some more concrete nitty gritty.
Yeah.
For anybody who's like, wow, I want to work at a publishing house, I want to be an editor or maybe a writer, what advice would you give them? Where should they start?
Ooh, so that's really interesting because there are a number of paths into publishing, and publishing can
Mm,
be historically a little tricky to get into, especially if you're like from a marginalized background, if you're like
mm,
queer or a person of color, or like, don't come from like a, middle class background and have like a financial safety net because publishing is based in America, it's based out of New York and it's quite expensive to live there. And, right now, HarperCollins, the people at HarperCollins are striking for
ooh,
better wages and they have a union and everything. And, like they're so amazing, but it really like highlights how much the publishing industry as a whole needs to improve and do better by, marginalized people and
mm,
also people who are like in the lower ranks of like publishing houses, whether they're like editorial assistants or like assistants in different departments, and anyone who's like below like middle management, like they deserve better pay and better hours and
mm,
better like more equitable workloads. And so if you want to get into publishing industry, be aware of like what are the obstacles.
sure.
And but it's still like an amazing space to work in. And I kind of got into publishing in an unusual way, which was that, as I mentioned, I was a game writer
Right.
and I kind of went sideways where I left the games industry and did like an internship and applied for my current job. And I didn't have any major prior experience in publishing other than that one brief internship.
Mm,
And the way that I kind of like explained what I had to offer was that I talked about, my experience in like book blogging, because I was and am still a book blogger.
nice.
Um, book blogging, writing for Book Riot, like freelance writing, and my interest in like all these different genres, and how like in my previous job I also like wrote and edited for a lot of different genres and stories. And so I'd say that like there is a traditional path to publishing where you do like a million internships and sometimes they're unpaid, which is
Mm,
BS. Internships should be paid.
mm,
Um, that there's a traditional path where you like maybe you attend a publishing program or you do lots of unpaid internships and then you like finally get your foot in the door. But stick out for internships that are paid. There's a
mm,
lot more remote internships available now that because of the pandemic. So if you can't go in person, grab a remote internship. And also like don't sell yourself short because a
mm,
lot of teens are so active and doing so much. Like maybe like if you're a teen who's making videos on Book Talk, or if you're book
mm,
blogging, or you have a Bookstagram, those are things you can put on your resume. Those are things you can talk about and say, I understand the book industry. I have an interest in publishing. I understand the audience. I know how to work in social media. Like these are skills. So like I would say the most important thing to think about when you are applying, like want to get into publishing or actually any industry, is to take a look at the skills and things you've done, because you've definitely done a lot of things because teens these days are so talented. And just like reframe them. Be like, oh, this Bookstagram, don't think of it as like, oh, I'm just posting photos or whatever. That's a skill. Like social media is a skill. Communication is a skill. Like a lot of things that you think may not be skills that you can put on your resume or use to talk about in an interview, they are real meaningful skills that like, even like us, like me as, an older 30-year-old can learn from the younger generations, and that's what you have to offer. And like your youth and your skill in like the social media space and like understanding what's trending and cool, that's a skill. So just like take a look at your life and see what you've done and be proud of it.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. I've done some resume workshops with teens, and people are like, "Oh, but I don't have any experience." And I go, "False." And we find, like 10 or 20 things.
Oh yeah.
And also a quick plug, if you're like, "Oh, yeah, I do want to do some kind of book blogging or book talk," get in touch with us at the free library.
Woo!
But
Amazing.
yeah, that's great advice. Thanks so much. So shifting gears slightly, do you have advice for any young writers, people who want to become novelists or, write the next vampire nonfiction book? What advice would you give them? Where should they start?
Yeah. So of course I'll go back to my like tried and true advice, which is read widely.
Hmm.
And for writers, not only read widely, but read analytically. Look at what are the books that you like, what are the books that you don't like, but might other people might like, and like see what appeals to them and kind of like try to understand what about these stories makes them work. And because I think it's really important for writers to understand storytelling as like a craft,
Hmm.
um and have fun with it, and just like the best book is the book that you've written.
Oh.
Right, like you can daydream about it all you want, but like the best book is the book that you put down on paper, and like the first draft will often be very ugly, and
Mhm.
that's okay. And just like have fun with it and like write what you want to write, and just have fun, write, and read a lot and get to know what's going on in the market. Not Don't like try to learn everything about the market so that you can like fit yourself into a box, but I think it's a rule in writing as well, where it's like learn the rules so you can break them.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
like learn the rules of publishing so you can break them. Learn what like is hot in the publishing industry, and then see how you can use that to like maybe sell your book to an agent, or get people interested in it online when you like tweet or post on
Yeah.
Bookstagram about it. Just like kind of learn the context of storytelling. And also, I think something that's really great is when writers really know what they want to say, because
Mm.
ultimate to me, stories are about communication. Storytelling is about telling someone else about you, or trying to connect with them. So when a writer clearly knows what they're trying to say, that's really impactful, and I think that comes through in their stories. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So, okay, speaking of breaking rules, I mentioned to one of the teens at the library that I was going to be interviewing you. And one of the first things they said was like, yeah, I would have to learn how to spell a little better. I'm bad at that part. Do you have advice for people who want to get better at editing, or can you talk about like what does editing look like? Like how much are you pointing out to writers their spelling mistakes and how much is it at like larger scale story things?
So great news for this person. First of all, there is spell check, so you're good on that front.
Yeah.
And also, there's like different types of editors. I'm an editor that works on developmental edits and works on like creating helping the writer create the best story possible. And occasionally that means correcting typos, but usually that's not my main purpose.
Hmm.
When a manuscript is in its final draft and like ready to move on to the next stage is copy edits. And
Right.
so the copy editor will look for those spelling mistakes. They'll look for inconsistencies and errors. And they have that eagle eye. They'll like see if the writing is flowing, if there's grammar mistakes, spelling mistakes, the whole nine yards. So, if you're a very detail oriented person who's like amazing at grammar and spelling, and organization, consider being a copy editor, because copy
Right.
editors are my personal heroes. I think they're amazing. I could never do what they do. It feels like what they do is magic. I'm like, oh my God, your brains are like supercomputers. It's so cool. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't worry about spelling too much, to be honest, because I'm more worrying about the big picture of like what makes a good story and like how can I help the author get across what they want to say.
Nice. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that this team will be very happy to hear that news.
Yeah. And also, you know, going back to like reading a lot, when the more you read, the more you get better at like knowing what makes sentences flow and like what's good
Mm,
grammar. Like it's kind of like this osmosis. Like, yeah, you can sit down with a grammar book, but that's boring. Or you could read like 30 fantasy books and then suddenly your brain will like start like absorbing like what's you know, correct grammar and stuff. And also like another thing that sorry, I'm getting on my soapbox.
this is what
Another
you're here
thing, you
for.
know, think outside the box. You know, there is like in school that you're taught like this is good grammar, but like what is grammar? You know, like, you know,
Mm,
there is like what is considered like good grammar and like correct grammar, but you know, in our daily lives, people speak and communicate in very different ways, and like books can like have different forms of like grammar and spelling, and that's okay because you know maybe someone's speaking in a dialect or they're speaking
mm.
coming from a different walk of life, and you know there's so many different types of books and stories out there, so like kind of you know get out the box and think about like it's important, you know, it's good to know like just so that your like teachers don't dock you points on your essays to like know what makes for like a sentence that is grammatically correct, but you know also there are so many stories out there and ways of writing.
I love that. So we've talked a lot about reading widely, right? And I think a lot of our teens do. And I think that a lot of our teens are reading not just lots of books, but they're also reading a lot of fanfic. And I'm wondering if you have any opinions or thoughts about fanfic or teens who like fanfic and are interested in
Ooh.
other kinds of writing.
I love fanfic. I read a little fic myself.
Heck yeah.
And yeah, I think that fanfic writers are incredibly talented. I think it's a great like space to, you know, work on your writing chops and explore, you know, stories that like, you know, make you happy and that like fulfill you. Um and there are quite a few fanfic writers who have made the leap into traditional publishing, and you know often those are the books that I like the most. Like I'll pick up a book
Mhm.
and be reading it and be like, wow, this flows, it's like the romance is so like meaningful and impactful and like the world building is so complex, and then I like look up an interview on them and they're like, oh, I used to be a fanfic writer, and
Yep.
you're like, oh, I see, they were like, you know, in the trenches like working on their writing, and like you know you get getting feedback and like
Yeah.
figuring out what people love, so I think that's great. I will say that one thing that I don't know if it's commonly known, but like writers can't really look at fanfic of their work because of legal
Yeah.
reasons. So that's a good thing to note. So if you're ever like, oh, I wrote this fan fiction and I want to share it with the writer, and the writer's like, I can't look at it, like it's not personal. Don't
Mhm.
worry about it. Um, but yeah, you know, fan fiction is a great space for you know, getting into writing. And I think it's amazing. And I have so much admiration for like fan fiction writers.
Me too. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, and I hope anybody who's watching feels good about getting official sanction from a real life book editor.
Yeah,
All
I think
right,
the stigma
so
is going away.
um, my last question is, what advice would you give your teenage self, little baby
Ooh,
Jessica?
oh my gosh. Um, I think I would have like two types of advice. One is you should actually talk to your professors in college, because
Mm,
I was always like, office hours, not for me. Imagine talking to a professor, never. But now I'm like, well, I should have talked to my professors,
mm,
and you know, make use of your like college career center to get resources, and you know, make use of all the resources that your college has to offer, whether it's like career counseling, you know, office hours, like talk to your professors because they can write you recommendations. You
mm,
know, go to your career center and, you know, like also talk to your friends and like, yeah, make use of your resources, and which I did not do and probably should have done. I got my first full-time job off Craigslist, which worked out
whoa,
great for me, but generally is not the path that you want to go.
yeah. Great. And I'm
Um,
sure that advice of like talk to your professors, you can get recommendation letters from them. I think that's probably true in high schools too. And they probably
oh
also
yes.
have like a career counselor who could help you if you're not yet in
Oh
college.
yes, absolutely. Talk to your teachers. Your
Hmm.
teachers would probably like really appreciate it. Um, and my other advice would be to tell my young self to do more stretches because I was doing so much typing. And nowadays I'm always on my phone, which I'm sure the teens of today can connect to. And
Yeah.
that will catch up to you and you will have wrist and arm problems. So do your stretches, find ways to like use your devices, but in a way that doesn't like harm your body because
Mm,
you won't be young forever.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
stretch, drink water, take breaks. And, resting is uh, a meaningful thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. So I said that was the last question. But speaking of taking breaks, I think for a lot of us, it is our phones, right? Do you have ways to take breaks or like hobbies that don't involve screens or your phone that you might recommend to us?
Ooh. I go on a lot of walks.
Nice.
And then I do like, and because I'm so used to like consuming media and like kind of like I'll immediately get bored if I'm like, oh, I have to walk around and like look at trees, even though trees are great. So I'll usually like pop in a podcast
Hmm.
and go on a long walk. And then so I'm like entertained, but like my body is moving and I'm like not really like looking at a screen. So I recommend that. And like find hobbies that you enjoy, like baking or
Mm.
sketching. And don't be so worried, like especially because I know schools often push teens, like you have to achieve, you have to like
Mm.
get good grades, or like schools or parents or society pushing teens to achieve, but like doing something creative or fun or fulfilling is also productive.
Yeah. Well, especially if you're trying to get into a creative career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like the things I was doing, like reading late into the night, like watching lots of fun anime and
Yeah.
like learning what makes a story tick. Like those are things that helped me like write my college application essay and
Mm.
later helped me like write short stories and book blog and eventually led to like me being in like a creative career both in game writing and then now in editing.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So speaking of book blogging, what's your book blog? How can we check out what you're reading?
Um so
Or is it
it's
a secret editors only book
oh
blog?
it's not a secret. It's richincolor.com. It is a book blog that focuses on young adult books by and about people of color. And it's a blog that I joined in my senior year of college. So I blog along with several other bloggers who I love and have learned a lot from. And we just kind of rotate writing book reviews and like here are the new books for the week and that kind of thing. And we've been doing it for like 7, 8 years now.
Yeah,
So many
wow.
years. So I feel kind of like an elder of book blogging where it's like the youths are doing cool like bookstagram book talks and I'm like, in my day, we had a book website and
Back in my day, we had Zanga and we liked it.
we wrote long form reviews and we still do. But it really helped me get into like reading lots of different YA books and kind of
Hmm.
seeing what's out there. And it's really fun.
Yeah, and it sounds like a great way to find new books by people of color.
Yes, absolutely.
We love that. Cool. Well, I will make sure that all of that information is in the description box, along with ways to get in touch with us at Field Teen Center, because we want to know what books you guys are reading. We want to know what books you're writing. Tell us about your OCs. Tell us about other jobs you want to learn about, and we'll try to get them in front of you. So you can always DM us on Instagram. You can email us, and you can always visit us in person at Field Teen Center. We're open Monday through Friday from 1 to 5 p.m. We're on the ground floor of Parkway Central Library at 1901 Vine Street, and we love to see you. So thanks so much for watching. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
Yes, and I hope everybody finds something great to read and has lots of luck writing.